Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Mariama, and I'm the chair of Livable Raleigh. I want to welcome everyone this evening. We're a grassroots group, Livable Raleigh is. We are a group of Raleigh residents who have served in our communities and served our city. And we're committed to offering fact-based information about the issues that affect our quality of life here in Raleigh. Livable Raleigh's mission is to educate, inform, and engage. When you know more about the issues you care about, you will become engaged in your community. After all, great neighborhoods make great cities. Webinar formats are a little bit different than the meeting formats that we're all used to. So let me share with you some of the operational specialties about tonight. Number one, all of the attendees' microphones and videos for the webinar format have been muted or turned off. The only people who you will see and hear from tonight are me as your host, our Q&A moderator, Mike Lindsay, and our esteemed panelists whom you'll meet shortly. Questions should be submitted through the Q&A function, which is at the base of your screen. And we will publish the questions that we will ask. The chat function is enabled, and I'm glad to see you're using it. We won't be able to answer, well, we'll follow the chat questions as we can. But to be honest with you, with other conversations going on in chat, sometimes it's a little hard to find that nugget of a question. So if you have a question you want to be answered tonight, I suggest you use the question and answer function. And if you want to share chat in the meantime, by all means do. I want to give you a heads up that our program tonight is packed with information. And we expect that we will begin the Q&A session immediately following the presentation. This means that it may be closer to 8:15 when we finish answering questions and end the webinar. If you cannot stay for the question and answer session, but want to ask us a question about the bond, please send us an email at livableraleigh@gmail.com. Okay, I want to make sure my moderator host here is ready to roll. Okay, now I would like to introduce you to Russ Stevenson, who will be moderator for tonight's panel. By profession, Russ is a LEED accredited architect, a historic preservation professional, and urban design consultant. In addition to these impressive credentials, Russ has served Raleigh for 14 years as a city councilor at large and as mayor pro tem. Okay, Russ, take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, Susan. Our purpose today is to bridge the gap between Raleigh's most pressing housing needs, which you see named, indicated on the left, and Council's current affordable housing bond proposal. First thing I'm going to do is describe the affordable bond housing needs from the authoritative source. Then I'll describe Council's currently adopted affordable bond proposal, a very thin proposal that does not yet address those needs. Then I will introduce in succession our webinar panelists who will provide insights and recommendations for the bond commitments that will bridge this gap. Okay. So first up, the most important document in defining Raleigh's affordable housing needs is our federally mandated consolidated plan. You see a graphic from the cover here. It serves as the 5-year roadmap of comprehensive goals and coordinated strategies to address housing and community needs of the low and moderate income residents. This is a federally mandated 255-page document. It does, as a takeaway says, defines Raleigh's most pressing housing needs. So what does it say about those? Well, here is a excerpt from the summary of housing needs from the consolidated plan. Very low and extremely low income households are most affected, with 16,685 extremely low income households experiencing severe cost burdens spending more than 50% of their income on housing and utility costs. The need for affordable housing is further exacerbated by the loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, either demolished or redeveloped into above market rate or luxury apartments. So those are direct quotes right out of the federally mandated consolidated plan. So now switching to the other side of my intro chart, here is council's adopted $80 million bond plan. They describe it as being buckets, 5 buckets, and you see the buckets here. We'll go into more detail about those later. I'll only say that the top 3 are about building larger, new and rehab projects. The bottom 2 are smaller scale endeavors that have to do with neighborhood stabilization. But what you won't see anywhere on this chart is anything that has to do with how the money will be spent in terms of meeting those needs that were just outlined in the consolidated plan. You won't see where the money is going to be spent. You won't see how many units are going to be produced. And most importantly, there are no commitments to the consolidated plan's greatest needs, households at 30 to 50% of AMI. Now, I'm going to talk just briefly about that last number. That's kind of cryptic, but it's a term of art. AMI stands for Area Median Income, and that is the census number for the Cary, Raleigh Metropolitan Service Area, and it defines what the average income is for that area. And so what the consolidated plan does, it says we're going to focus, we should be focusing our needs on people who make households that make between 30 and 50% of that area median income. So what does that look like? Here is a chart right out of the 2017 Wake County Affordable Housing Plan. And so what you see here on the left, starting on the left, a home health aide with 2 kids making $20,200 is in that category of below 30% AMI. A retail salesperson living alone with an income of $25,600 is in that range of 30 to 50% AMI. A school teacher with 1 kid, $28,500 income, again, in that 30 to 50% AMI range. And then finally on the right, firefighter, 2 parents, 2 kids, an income of $34,300, again, within that 30 to 50% AMI range. So my takeaway is these are people that are critical to our community, but there's no bond commitment to serve them. So I had the good fortune to be able to sit in on Zoom, mostly Zoom meetings for the council-appointed bond advisory committee process. And of course, COVID made things a little more difficult, but here's what I learned. First, there were no public input sessions that had been scheduled, but they were canceled due to COVID. The open survey that they held lacked statistical methods for judging data validity. No committee members were tenants of subsidized housing. And finally, the committee prohibited any public input at their meetings. So my takeaway is that it was a deeply flawed process with almost no meaningful public input. So with that said, I've defined the needs based on our consolidated plan. I've outlined what the bond includes, which is not much. And now I'm going to turn the program over to our panelists to describe Livable Raleigh's recommendations for bridging the gap. And we're going to begin now with Yolanda Taylor, and I will introduce her. Yolanda L. Taylor is a managing attorney at Legal Aid of North Carolina, where she practices primarily in the area of community economic development. I guess I can go to the next slide, can't I? There she is. Community economic development and fair housing law. She represents grassroots community groups around issues involving gentrification, fair housing, and affordable housing. Yolanda recently received the 2019 Leader in the Law Award and the Gwyneth B. Davis Public Service Award for her work with communities. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Russ, former Councilman Stevenson, for that wonderful introduction and for laying the foundation to this important discussion on tonight. Again, my name is Yolanda Taylor. I am a fair housing attorney and community economic development lawyer with Legal Aid of North Carolina. I'm also a proud member of the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. So let's get started. Some of you may already know, but maybe you don't know what are affordable housing bonds, or what are housing bonds generally speaking. Affordable housing bonds are financing tools used by municipalities to raise capital. So that's what Raleigh is doing. Raleigh is proposing to put a affordable housing bond on this year's ballot that will be generated and supported by tax revenue to its citizens. Affordable housing bonds therefore have to be approved by voters in a ballot initiative because, again, it may increase your real estate property taxes. So here's a brief recap of Raleigh's housing bond history. In 1990, Raleigh passed a housing bond for $20 million. In 2000, there was a bond for $14 million. In 2005, there was a bond for $20 million. And in 2011, there was a bond for $16 million. And as former Councilman Stevenson stated, this current proposed bond is for $80 million. So who have Raleigh housing bonds actually served? Based on our research, which has been very diligent, we were able to determine that past housing bonds have mainly targeted those who are at moderate income levels as opposed to those who are at the greatest need, as stated in Raleigh's own consolidated plan. And those who are at the greatest need are low and very low income earners at and below 50% of the AMI, and especially at and below 30% of the area median income in Raleigh. So if you're going to have a bond, arguably Raleigh has a duty, generally speaking, because it receives certain important federal HUD funding like community development block grants and home funds. Raleigh has a legal obligation to affirmatively further fair housing in the way that it uses these federal funds. And because we see that there's this great need that has been established by Raleigh's own need assessment, arguably this bond should promote fair housing per the fair housing statute. And to promote fair housing, it means to eliminate barriers to inclusion, promote equity and diversity in funding for those most affected by the lack of affordable and fair housing. So it also means, when we talk about fair housing, that Raleigh has a legal obligation to address significant disparities in housing. So that's why we are highlighting the fact that Raleigh's stated need is for those who are at and below 30% of the AMI, who are extremely in need of housing. So let's talk about affordability. This bond is titled 2020 Raleigh Affordable Housing Bond. What do we mean by affordability? Well, affordability is generally defined by HUD as housing that costs no more than 30% of a person's total household income. So when we look at those costs, we're talking about rent, mortgage, and utility costs. So that's the general definition for housing. But when you look on the community level, you have to go deeper into what measurements should we use in looking at what affordability mean based on a area's area medium income, and I would get to that. But in the market, what you need to understand that it's extremely hard to produce affordable units, especially for those who are at or below 30% of the area medium income. What you need in order to produce these types of affordable housing units, you need soft money, or you need voucher assistance, or you need the public housing to be involved. You need federal low-income housing tax credits, preferably those at 9%, which are hard to get from what I hear, but at least 4% low-income housing tax credits. You may need a Habitat model where there's a second mortgage and maybe sweat equity. And you also may need state and local resources as it relates to funds from the housing trust, bonds, and land. So again, I stated that when you determine what's affordable, affordability is defined on a local level. So when you look at the data for Raleigh, Cary, the metropolitan service area, the data from 2019, the area median income in our area is $93,100 for a family of four. That's the average salary per year that a family of four makes in Raleigh. So you will be surprised to know that if you annually make an income of $74,150, and that's the combined income for your family of four, you are considered low income in Raleigh. You are considered extremely, well, very low income, let's say, or at the medium, you will need a low income housing tax credit if you're at 60% of the AMI. Because then, according to data, you're making on an average $55,860 annually for a family the size of four. And you're considered to be very low income for a family of four again if you average yearly $46,350 a year. And then you are extremely low income if you're at 30% and below of the area median income. And I want you to note that we're talking about low wealth workers. We're talking about working people who average $27,800 a year. And again, these were the targeted population documented in Raleigh's own fair housing planning document called a consolidated plan. So let's look at what affordable rent is depending on a family's income. So for a low income family of four, an affordable rent would be $1,853 a month. And remember those income brackets. When we're talking about a very low income family of four, an affordable rent may be $1,158 per month. But when we're talking about working people who make, on an average close to $30,000 annually, extremely low income, they will require a rent that's $695 per month. And former Councilman Stevenson did go over what we call the buckets, because that's all we have. That's all that has been generally publicly released are these buckets and these categories, which the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition believes is vague. We see that there's going to be 20% of this $80 million going towards transit-oriented site acquisition. We have no other details regarding like where are these sites, where they're going to be located, or the general public has no idea of like where these sites are going to be located. Are they going to be in gentrifying communities? Are they going to be in communities of opportunity that currently exist? Then you have 35% of the 80 million going towards public-private partnerships. Raleigh has yet to tell us or release whether or not they intend to intentionally partner with nonprofit or affordable housing developers. We have no idea regarding that. And then we have here that 30% of the funding would go towards the low-income housing tax credit gap financing. And again, that's what we stated is need to really build housing that's at or below 30% of the AMI. So just 30% of the funds are going towards this subsidy that's very important when we talk about low-income families who need affordable housing. And then again, we see 7.5% towards owner-occupied rehab and 7.5% towards home ownership or down payment assistance. So the reason why the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition believes that this bond does not go far enough to educate voters before November is because, and that it's not equitable, arguably, or inclusive, arguably, is because it lacked impacted voices at the table. I'm a firm believer that those who are most affected by the problem should be at the center of the solution. And at the inception of the Raleigh Housing Bond, there was a Raleigh Housing Bond committee that was put together by mostly professionals and grass top people, but it lacked a substantial voice at the table from those who have been impacted by homelessness, those who are in need of affordable housing. Their voices were not lifted up. But to give them credit, they attempt a survey during the pandemic, which we understand is hard. They did do a survey, but that survey, there were only 4,530 total participants out of Raleigh's large population. And that's a 0.96% response rate. And only about, based on my notes, 28% of those respondents were renters, and 29.2% were 29.2% were African Americans that responded to that bond. And I want to note here that in addition to the fair housing document that Raleigh put together in order to grab HUD funding, not only were those who had documented need at and below 30% of the AMI, they also stated that African American people in Raleigh had the most dire need for housing. So when you're talking about equity, inclusion, and racial justice equity, that's the stated need. So, and again, it does not address the stated need. So that's why the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition wanted to team with Livable Raleigh to bring this educational piece, because we think it's important that Raleigh voters are aware of where this bond is today. And again, it was passed without addressing public concern. I'm going to get into the steps that the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition has taken as it relates to going into public forum and lifting our voices and making it be known our concerns around this proposed bond. And as of today, we have not heard any additional information from the City Council regarding our concerns. So one of the major things that the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition did, and although I'm an attorney, I sit on that committee as an individual because I'm a resident of Wake County. We put together a letter to the City Council on June 2nd, and it was I have it here, it was like a 12-page letter. It wasn't just about our concerns or our complaints. We actually had recommendations that I crafted based on my expertise in the area of community economic development work, affordable housing, and fair housing. So that was submitted on June 2nd. And I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we recommended. The first thing was that the city should address the specific and identified need of its residents and take a balanced approach to growth by ensuring that affordable housing is located downtown, which has seen mass gentrification or displacement, and in other areas of town that may have higher areas of opportunity. So take a balanced approach is what we recommended. The second recommendation was that, again, we felt that because Raleigh stated what its most dire need for housing was, that the affordable housing bond should target and incorporate those who are most impacted by the need for affordable housing. And again, especially those with income at or below 30% of the annual median income. A third recommendation was that, again, ordinary residents like you watching today, residents in Raleigh, should have an opportunity to receive education beyond the vague buckets that we demonstrated to you, is what we've been told is part of the proposal. So ordinary residents should have an opportunity to receive education on the bond outside of a one-time public hearing. And the city should provide more details regarding the end goals of the bond by providing more details, again, regarding how the monies in each bucket will actually be used. Fourth, affordable housing should be an integral part of the city's growth strategy and spending. The city touts itself as being an equitable and inclusive community, then affordable housing should be an integral part of the city's growth strategy and spending. And this process should be intentionally formed by low-income and impacted residents. The city must respond. This is another recommendation. The city must respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by creating a clarified process with information that is going to be shared in a clear and centralized location. What's a place where they can actually get this information out? Are they actually getting far enough into the grassroots, or are they still grass top with this information? So we need a centralized location for granting emergency residential assistance for housing. We know that we're facing an epidemic as it relates to evictions and utility shutoffs for everyday Raleigh citizens, and not nonprofits, but the money should go in the hands of the people. So this is a timeline of action taken by the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. On February 21st, on the Mayor's Unity Day, we had a press conference, an in-person press conference in front of the Raleigh Convention Center to talk about the need to have impacted voices at the table to help craft a meaningful affordable housing bond. On May 20th, the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition actually attended a public hearing, and we read into the record the grievances and concerns and some recommendations that we had around affordable housing. On May 28th, we actually invited Councilman Corey Branch to one of our coalition meetings to share our concerns and to discuss the bond referendum with him. Then again, on June 2nd, I sent the written bond comments to members of the city council and city staff. That may have been around that time, if not before. Then in March and May, our coalition members, we attended an advisory committee meeting from this time frame. They were actually, because of the pandemic, having their advisory committee meetings online. And when I'm referring to the committee that was created to vet the affordable housing bond and to make recommendations to the city council, we were able to attend these meetings online, but we were not able to speak. We were just only able to listen in and take notes. Then from May to July, we had different members of our coalition had various meetings with former Councilman Sage Martin, Durham's Mayor Shrule, urban planner in Durham, Karen Lotto, and also with former president and CEO of DHIC, Greg Warren. We've also had comments and conversations individual people have with Yvette Holmes, who was the co-chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, Kia Baker, who was a member on that committee, and RWCA leadership and others, just to find out more information and to also share concerns. On July 7th, 2020, further action was taken to reiterate to the city council the dangers of passing a housing bond with no details. And there was actual only opposition from one city council person, and that was Council Member David Cox. The city decided, despite our concerns and despite that the majority of the people that spoke seemed to be opposed to the bond, the city decided to go ahead and push what the coalition believes is a blank check through the city and murmur something about dealing with the policies and the details around it later. And to this date, we have not heard anything. And we believe we definitely need to hear something about this bond at least by September 4th, when people begin to make their early voting plans. But that's from the coalition perspective. As a member, those are the concerns that we have around this bond. So I definitely want to thank you. And if you have any questions regarding our work, please feel free to reach out to the coordinator and the convener of the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition, Ms. Jasmine Childs, and this is her address here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Yolanda. Next up is our next panelist, Bob Gary. He's retired from an illustrious journalism career in New Jersey and North Carolina. Since then, he has dedicated himself to becoming Livable Raleigh's resident expert on affordable housing funding. He is also a member of Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. Take it away, Bob. Bob.
Unmute. Okay, I got it. I'm going to
just one note. Bob, since I don't have your slide prompts, just tell me when to go with the slide. Next slide.
Okay. So I'm going to talk briefly about how affordable housing is built and how it's financed. I am a member of the Housing Justice Coalition, but for right now, this is me talking. This is my perspective. And to jump ahead, I'm going to talk about why, from the city's perspective, it's a lot less expensive to support so-called affordable housing projects for people with rather moderate incomes, and a lot more expensive to provide housing for people with low or very low incomes, or in some cases, no income at all. So next slide, Russ. When Raleigh talks about its affordable housing programs, these programs are by and large not for poor people. And that's where we believe the bond money should come in. It should allow major changes in the city's programs and allow Raleigh to be creative, generative really, and starting to meet the huge unmet needs of the poor. Next slide. But let's start at the beginning. The biggest source of funding for affordable housing by far is a federal program called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, LIHTC for short. It's the basis of everything you will hear referred to as a tax credit project, and it's the basis of most of what Raleigh does in terms of affordable housing programs. Now, not all affordable housing projects use the LIHTC subsidy, but most of them do around the country. And projects rely on LIHTC. There's a whole industry that's grown up around it. And that industry produces housing that looks like, next slide. This is Wakefield Commons in North Raleigh. It was built by a for-profit developer who builds affordable housing projects. 3 stories, 1, 2, 3-bedroom apartments. This qualifies as affordable housing because the rents are capped at 30% of the tenant's income. Because the rents are capped, the LIHTC subsidy is available. Next slide. So LIHTC subsidies will typically supply 40% of the cost of building a project. Roughly 40%, it varies. Sometimes it's more, could be a little less. But if it's 40%, that's a good start, but we still need another 60% of our costs to cover our project, to cover construction, plus operating costs and maintenance costs and our management fees. And if we're a for-profit builder, we want to make a profit. So it has to cover that. Slide 6. So that brings us to the subject of rents, because the first place we're going to look for the other 60% that we need is rents. Now, in a market rate apartment project, all of the financing would be based on the expected rents, and the builder still makes a profit. So for these affordable housing projects, the LIHTC subsidy of 40% or so is a big head start. Next slide. But that head start quickly disappears because remember, you can't just charge any old rent. Can't charge what the market will bear. The rents are capped at 30% of family income, or else you don't get the LIHTC subsidy. And another rule of LIHTC is not only are the rents capped, but so is the income. To earn the LIHTC subsidies, the builder cannot rent to people or families earning more than 60% of the area median income. And someone asked in the chat, okay, area median income always for a family of 4? No, it varies up and down with family size. So next slide. So let's look at our rent prospects. Consider 2 families, both with 2 adults, 2 kids. It's a family of 4. Area median income, you've already heard, about $93,000 a year. Next slide. So our first family makes very close to 60% of that area median income. They make $54,000 a year. Maybe one's a teacher, one's a freelance editor, somebody's part-time because they have 2 kids, school-age kids, maybe one of the kids is preschool. Anyway, their income is $54,000. This family is allowed to pay 30% of their income in rent, which is about $1,400 a month. Next slide. So these tenants are ideal from a rental perspective for a for-profit affordable housing builder. Maximum allowed income, maximum allowed rental, solid jobs, all of that. But I'm going to tell you, based on a lot of discussions I've had with people in this field, even that max rental of $1,400 a month probably doesn't get us to the finish line for our financing. So, LIHTC subsidies are the first layer of financing. $1,400 a month rent is the second layer, but it could be a little skimpy, and we're still short on the icing, which is our profit. And on management fees, maintenance, operating an apartment complex is not free. We're probably 10 or maybe even 15% short of the money we need to be successful, even with LIHTC, even with max rent. So next slide. So now we've talked about a family that makes $54,000. Here's a second family. 2 adults, 2 kids, but their income is 30% of AMI. Very low income. HUD calls it extremely low income. 1 job at Burger King, maybe. 1 job as a home health aide. Again, part-time because 2 kids. The income for this family, $27,000 a year. Their maximum rent is half of the first family's. They're only allowed to pay $700 a month. So if $1,400 a month left us a little short, $700 a month leaves us very short. Next slide. And not just twice as short, where we were 10% short with the first family, we're now 35% short with the second one, 3.5 times as much. So, and this is where this next slide. So I think, give me the next slide. So this is where the city comes in. The city provides gap financing to fill the gap so these affordable housing projects can go ahead. Now, we've been after City Council to tell us how the bond money will be used. If it's going to be used for gap financing, for whom, at what level of affordability, and so on. We've gotten no response from City Council at all. We started asking in February. We didn't get any answer then, not in March, not anything at all, nothing. Now, we want the bond money to help that second family. We want it to help people who are homeless or who pay so much for their crappy housing now that they can't afford to feed their kids. But so far, no commitments from City Council at all, except 5 buckets with names on them. Slide, next slide. Actually, go back to that last slide. I skipped one. Go back to the last one. But in June, yeah, that's right. So in June, the city did provide us with some really telling information about how Raleigh has spent other housing funds in the absence of bond funding over the past 5 years. This slide and the next one, Russ, you want to show that? These are the 2 slides that city staff gave us with information about spending over the last 5 years. They're hard to read on screen, but I've done the deciphering for you, and here's the takeaway. So next slide. Over the last 5 years, Raleigh's gap financing has helped to produce 2,709 units of so-called affordable housing. That's not a bad number. But out of that total of 2,709, just 87 were built for that second family, for the family with an income of 30% AMI or less. 87 units out of 2,709 for poor people. That's pathetic. 2,390 of the units were built with the intention of renting them to our first family and others like them with incomes at or close to 60% of AMI. The vast majority, in other words, were built for people with moderate income levels. Over 5 years, the city has spent $46.8 million in the form of gap subsidies for all of these projects. That's about $9.2 million a year. That money comes from a 1-cent property tax and another $3 million from federal community development block grant funds. So the city got a lot of units for our 46 million because, remember, the moderate income units don't require nearly as much gap financing per unit as units for the poor. In fact, the city spent an average of just $17,000 per unit. Gap financing for low-income units would be 3 or perhaps even 4 times that much. But the city decided we want more units. We don't want to spend all our money on poor people. Slide, next slide. So here's our pitch. Keep doing what you're doing with the penny for housing tax and the CDBG funds. Keep spending $9 million a year for moderate income housing. Don't need to change that. But with the bond money, which will be $80 million over maybe 8 years, another $10 million a year, let's put Raleigh in the business of providing affordable housing for the poor. Last slide. So if I had more time, I'd talk about the plan Durham put in front of the Raleigh City Council last December.
Yep.
Durham passed a bond issue for housing last year of $95 million. They did it with an extremely detailed plan. They did it with a commitment to serving the greatest needs in Durham, the lowest income people. They did it with a commitment to community input. We have had none of that. So we're asking our city council to commit the bond to help those most in need. And with that, I'm gonna, that's all right.
Got a little ahead of myself there.
That's fine. Help most in need. Also, stop gentrification in Southeast Raleigh. That's another whole issue. I think you're going to hear something about that from our next speaker. And commit to an affordable housing task force with community representation to monitor the spending, not just of this bond money, but of all of our housing money. So now, and put equity first. Now I'm done. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate that. Our next panelist is Wanda Gilbert Coker. She's a longtime community leader advocating for fair housing and the most vulnerable residents of Southeast Raleigh. She's an active member of the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition, Black Lives Matter, and Raleigh Pact. Thank you for being with us, Wanda.
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here this evening and to discuss the housing bond. Those of you who follow me on social media, you know I like to talk about stuff like this. So this is great. So when I talk about housing justice, I start in Southeast Raleigh where I live. That's where the Black and brown people of Raleigh lived until gentrification came to be. Now, gentrification is one word for it, but you all know I call it ethnic cleansing. Now, when I say that, people get nervous, but that's exactly what it is. Black people built the city of Raleigh, most of it anyway. We built the plantation houses for the Duncans and the Hunters at Dorothea Ditts. If you live in Cameron Park or Cameron Village, your neighborhood is named after slave owners. Their wealth was their land and their slaves. Now, to be honest, that history most people don't want to acknowledge or remember. Sometimes Black people don't want to remember it. Not any more than white people want to. Anyway, Southeast Raleigh is where African Americans lived during Jim Crow because it was the only part of Raleigh where we were allowed to live. In Southeast Raleigh, we were allowed to buy a house and create our own neighborhood and our own community. Our houses in Southeast Raleigh were the affordable housing in Raleigh because the Black people who owned them didn't have any established wealth. And the white people who had all the wealth didn't want our houses because they refused to live in Black neighborhoods. But in the last 20 years, all of that has changed. Now the descendants of those white slave owners and the white families, also known as gentrifiers, want our houses, land, and established wealth. And you know what? They have the money to buy our houses, land right out in front of us and tear it down and tear downs and evictions. So they can build those great big plantation looking houses for themselves. And we, the Black community, don't have the money and political power to stop them. Why not? 2 centuries of slavery, a century of Jim Crow. That's why. Call it gentrification if you want. Again, I call it ethnic cleansing. Some of the pictures of East College Park, near St. Augustine's University, were taken by my friend, Robert Brown Jr. This neighborhood and around it was 100% Black. Now it's 52% white. Where did all the Black people go? They're probably in Knightdale, Gardner, maybe even Durham, because they can't even afford to live in Raleigh anymore. So what is the city's role in this? Instead of helping Black folks keep their houses, their small affordable houses, the city comes in and tear down our houses and gives the land to developers like John Kane. And developers put up apartment buildings for the white millennials, or AKA gentrifiers, who want to be close to downtown. because they can't afford anything in Cameron Park or Cameron Village. The pictures tell the story of white folks pushing into Southeast Raleigh and Black folks getting pushed out. There are a lot of questions about the affordable housing bond. The one I'm asking is, after 4 centuries of slavery and Jim Crow, is the city of Raleigh going to start helping Black families find affordable houses and keep and fix up their affordable houses? Or is the city of Raleigh going to keep pushing us out of our own neighborhoods by gentrification and ethnic cleansing? Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Wanda. We really appreciate your perspective as a person who lives in Southeast Raleigh and knows all the people there and really experiences their pain. So next up is Hua Huang. He's a grad student at NC State University's Marine Science program. He's an advocate for vulnerable communities and an active member of Sierra Club and the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. Glad you could be with us, Hua.
Thank you, Russ. Before I start diving into the main message I wish to deliver tonight, because in so many ways I'm still a student, I want to take this chance to first thank everyone from Wake County Housing Justice Coalition for the opportunity to learn so much about what affordable housing means with all of our weekly meetings. And I want to thank Livable Raleigh for giving me a chance to speak up about Raleigh's need for reparation effort. So here's what I have to offer. On July 14th, 2020, the Asheville City Council voted unanimously to provide reparations to those harmed by past racial injustices. That night, the council formally apologized to Black residents for racist practices throughout history, including slavery and discriminatory housing policies. The council presented a concrete plan to invest in the community by increasing minority home ownership, increasing minority business ownership and career opportunities, and implementing strategies to grow equity and generational wealth. And Mayor Esther Manheimer called for the creation of a Community Reparations Commission to recommend specific plans for implementation. And a week later, we have Durham with their Racial Equity Task Force calling for Durham City Council to establish a Wealth Equity Fund, also known as Reparation for Past Injustices. The task force consisted of 18 residents impaneled by Mayor Steve Schewel and Mayor Pro Tem Jillian Johnson, and it was chaired by Elaine O'Neill, a Superior Court judge and Dean of NCCU School of Law. Chair O'Neill stated that their work began well before the pandemic, which interrupted their progress, but also exposed the deepest wounds caused by racial inequity in Durham. Task force members said that Durham should join with other cities in a concerted effort to establish a national reparations effort. In addition to a wealth equity fund, the Durham Task Force issued a comprehensive list of recommendations in 7 categories, including and not limited to education, health, criminal justice, and of course, housing. And among their recommendations, here are some of the things that I found that I feel were pertinent to our discussion tonight. 1, they are calling for a collection of qualitative and quantitative data to understand and address health, wellness, and environmental justice issues caused by racial inequity. 2, they are calling for the city to track and publicize the impacts of development on minority residents. 3, the task force calls for a tracing of historical effect on housing prices and rents. And 4, the task force asked the city to track residents of Durham Housing Authority projects who are being relocated during renovations and find out where they are housed now. Raleigh, by contrast, has done virtually nothing to address our own legacy of segregation and discrimination against African Americans and other people of color. So I think it's time for Raleigh to have our own racial equity task force. It's time we address our own historic inequities in health, education, jobs, and housing with budgeted funds, with capital funds, with bond issues like the affordable housing bond. Nothing could be more relevant to the question of how we spend our affordable housing money than whether it's making up for past discrimination or if we're adding to it by further gentrification and displacement of Black and brown residents from historic communities of color. Thank you for your time.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hua. Now, I think we will move. Oh, I'm sorry. That is actually my cue to go back up on the stand and make some closing comments. We've heard from really excellent panelists today, and I want to thank them all. It's been my privilege to moderate this panel. I want to thank the webinar attendees and the panelists today and ask you to take action to support an affordable housing bond that reflects our values, our greatest housing needs, and our new vision of equity for our city. We at Livable Raleigh and the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition have been reaching out to those in need and to City Council at every opportunity since February of this year. Now it's time for Council to set aside the standard solutions of the past that have perpetuated race-biased development preferences and profits. We call on City Council to commit Raleigh's affordable housing bond funds to the most pressing needs identified in Raleigh's own consolidated plan, specifically the housing and community needs of Raleigh households with incomes at or below 30% of area median income. With that, I will turn the program over to Mike Lindsay, who will begin our question and answer session. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Russ. Okay, just to be mindful of time and respectful of people's time, we started a little bit late. We're going a little bit over what we had anticipated. So I'll lead with a question that's addressed to all 5 panelists. If you want to address it, great, individually. The question is, will you support the affordable housing bond in its current form? If your answer is no, what changes need to be made in order for you to support the bond?
So as an admin item, shall I put away the shared screen and get the panelists up on the screen?
I think so.
All right, well, there we are. Mike, where are you in this? You just finished talking to us. Can you wave at us?
There he is.
There he is. Okay, thanks, Mike. So could you repeat the question?
Okay, for all 5 of you, and try to keep your answers concise because we're over time right now already. Will you support the affordable housing bond in its current form? If your answer is no, what changes need to be made in order for you to support the bond?
Okay, I'll take a shot at that. I joined the Wake County Housing Coalition, Housing Justice Coalition in March. They were already at work trying to get council to define what this bond issue was for and whether it was going to address greatest needs. I assumed back then that we were going to support this bond issue because, of course, affordable housing is such an enormous need in this city, especially for low-income folks. I am shocked that it is now the end of August and council has refused to address anybody's concerns about this, has refused to define the uses of the bond money. They have one more chance. They put it off and they put it off and they put it off. They were supposed to present 2 weeks ago or last week, actually at City Council, put it off again. September 1, we're told they're going to have a discussion of this issue. They're going to make some commitments and vote on them. So we'll see what that consists of. Right now, I'm intending to vote against the bond, but I don't want to. I want this council to step up to its responsibilities.
Wanda.
I would like to answer as well. I will not support the bond as is because right now, as far as we can see, what I can see is full of the buckets are full of gentrification. And that's the last thing Southeast Raleigh and the city of Raleigh needs is more gentrification poured on us from buckets. For instance, 316 Fisher Street, that is money was used, that money is supposed to be used to help low to moderate income people buy houses, but that money was used to buy this $500,000 plus house in East College Park. So no, I will not support the bond in its current status of buckets of gentrification. Now, if they want to really get serious and undo all the historical wrongdoings that they have done to the African Americans by gentrification and taking our property, displacing us, pushing us out, forcing us out, the hotels on New Bern Avenue are full of people, and they know those people did not sell their houses. Gentrification is what I say exactly is ethnic cleansing to be done for make a voting block for political power. Then they put us in these hotels on New Bern Avenue and such. And now because of COVID-19, we're busting at the seams. So until the city of Raleigh sits down, Mayor Baldwin, Corey Branch, because all these houses, motels, majority are in his district, and others, the ones at large, Nicole and I forgot his name right now, but you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, Melton Patrick. No, that's Patrick Buffkin. Jonathan Melton. I apologize. You know, this gets me a little, you know, because this is passion. This is real. We're talking about human beings. So again, my answer is no until the city of Raleigh is really ready to sit down and show what it. You know, they say they're not in the business of social service, except for when it comes to the police, but they are. So you need to do something about the issues that we face as African Americans.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Wanda. Anyone else? Wah.
Unmute. There you go.
So yeah, I attended the webinar meetings of the Raleigh's Affordable Housing Bond Committee that was, I believe, headed by Larry Jarvis. And a concern is also shared by many other people from Wake County Housing Justice Coalition that that meeting does not consist of the people who are from the ground. They don't really give the opportunity for the impacted residents to actually speak. We only really have the we can only listen. We can't really like bring options or comments or suggestions on how you should how you should incorporate funds in this way or that way. And my other issue is the affordable housing bond as it is right now is also a lack of specificity, as everyone else on the panel already put it very well, better than I could. I mean, if I would like to see a more specific number as to how much of that money actually will go into addressing the needs of those making 30% AMI or below. Because at the rate this is going, 87 housing unit out of 2,900 is very, very small. It's not even for 50% to 130%. That's way less than that. And even if Raleigh can even commit, like say building 4 housing for people and like 50% or 60% AMI and then 1 for 30%, that proportion is still way more than the 87 unit to 2,900. So I'd like to see specific numbers, and if they can show that they're willing to build more and exactly how many more and where they're going to build it, then I might consider.
Great.
Hey, guys, we have a lot of questions coming in here.
Right.
And I hope people will hang with us because we're past time. A few dropped off. So Yolanda, you want to go ahead and please be concise. I know we're asking a lot, but.
I'm going to be concise. The first thing I want to say is that I'm not speaking as a member of Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. I'm speaking in my individual capacity. I believe that local governments offer an important opportunity for residents, ordinary people to be engaged in an important democracy or democratic process. Because there's not transparency or accountability, and because it does not address the most impacted need, I will have to vote no. I need more education. That's my personal thought.
We have
Okay.
time? Go ahead.
All right, can we go on to another question, or are we good?
No, we're good. Let's go to another question.
Okay. Oh, gosh. I'll go, let's see here. One person asked, since we do not know when tax revenues will return to normal, is it wise to even add 40 million to the city's debt obligations at this time?
Okay.
Opinions?
I don't know what the 40 million is. We're proposing to add 80 million, but I will say this, we probably are not going to issue those bonds, even if the bond issue is approved. I suspect those bonds won't be issued for a year, maybe two. It takes a while to put tax credit deals and other housing deals together, and the money isn't needed until they start construction. So hopefully our revenue situation will stabilize in the next 2 years. In my view, not only can we afford an $80 million bond, I think it's too small, actually. Durham, a city half our size, passed a $95 million bond and really got serious about affordable housing for low-income people. This is not a serious proposal to address affordable housing for low-income people, but it's better than nothing, I suppose, if they would define it that way. But it's, as we've all said, they refuse to define it in any way.
Okay. Here's another question. Do you know how many affordable housing units are available in Raleigh for the various AMI levels? Below 30%, 30 to 50%, etc.
We saw from the consolidated plan, we're short of 16,000.
685. Yeah.
16,000 plus 1,660, yeah. 16,685 units of affordable housing. So I don't know how many are available, but it's far short of the need.
Right.
Okay, here's a detail. I'm trying to find a detailed question up here. Somebody asked earlier on, can you clarify what transit-oriented site acquisition means?
I'll go for that one. So actually the 5 buckets are pretty much the same as they were for the last city council when I advocated adding that 5th bucket, which is transit-oriented site development. What that means is land banking, which is another way of saying, if you're going to build a transit system, BRT, along New Bern Avenue, there's an opportunity to make that transit benefit available to affordable people so they don't have to have as many cars to drive so much. And so the idea is that the city would go in and buy land around those transit stops, and then would then partner with developers using that land equity to get the affordability down so that it could benefit the most users. So it's all about buying land around transit sites and then using that land to partner with developers to build affordable mixed income and mixed use housing.
Okay.
I want to say something. Can I say something quick about transportation, Mike? I want to just say, again, we need the details because transportation can accelerate gentrification if it's not an equitable transportation plan and low wealth people aren't allowed to remain in their communities. A transportation plan can further gentrification as well. So I need more details again.
Okay. While you're talking, here's a question that was addressed specifically to you, Alana. Are there requirements for disclosures for the bonds from the state or any matching requirements from the federal government?
One of the legal requirements is that the city has a duty to affirmatively further fair housing. So I will think that as a local government who wants to be transparent and accountable to voters and its citizens, that it would provide more details. I mean, residents should have an opportunity to know what they're voting on in November. I can't say that there's a law that requires them to do specifically what Durham did, but if you're trying to grow equitably, and if you have values around inclusivity and diversity, then you would be transparent and accountable to your residents who are asking and expressing concerns.
Okay, thank you. This was a very early question in the presentations tonight. Was the data collected before the COVID pandemic or during?
Oh.
And I don't know which presentation they were asking that of, but
Well, let me just say, again, sort of back to my previous answer, those 5 buckets were originally designed by staff back in early 2018. So the answer is, throughout all the meetings of the Bond Advisory Committee, the only changes they made were to actually reduce the neighborhood stabilization dollar percentage a little bit and shift it over to the public-private partnership. So there was no recognition either A, of the greatest needs at 30 and 50% of AMI households, or of the additional impacts on those low wealth communities of COVID on their health and their unemployment and their eviction. No consideration at all.
okay, Russ, perfect timing. Here's another question for you that came early on that was addressed to you. It says, Russ just said that the area median income is the median of Raleigh and Cary residents.
Yeah, right. That is the census, what's it called? The Metropolitan Statistical Area. So
Okay.
that is a technique that the census uses to analyze census data for the entire United States. And it just happens that Raleigh is in a metropolitan statistical area that's called the Cary-Raleigh MSA.
Okay, you answered the other 2 questions the person had as a follow-up.
Okay.
Great. Let's see here. I don't know if I understand this question, but it says, how would the city and/or county disperse funding directly to the public if they do not use nonprofits?
Well,
Oh, Russ, you wanna go?
go ahead, Yolanda.
I think that was around the presentation when we were talking about COVID-19 and how people are now affected by evictions and utilities. Basically, I guess what that recommendation is about is that we got to make sure that actual people are using these important limited federal dollars to prevent eviction and to keep their utilities on. My understanding is that when these funds go to nonprofits, a lot of operational costs can like suck up a lot of the funding. So these fundings are important, and we just recommend that the funding is actually in the hands of the people who really need it during this crisis.
Thank you. Okay, this isn't a question, but a person says they want to get in touch with Wanda, and they're working on an economic development project. So we'll get you that information after this, Wanda. Let's see here. Going back to open. Oh boy.
So Mike, I want to say
Go ahead.
one thing that we haven't said so far. The numbers that the city gave us were for tax credit projects, and most of the money that they've spent for housing over the last 5 years were for tax credit projects built by, in some cases, nonprofit developers, some cases, for-profit developers. We've been told in the last few days that those numbers don't really reflect the reality of who comes to live in a project once it opens. So people may come to a project after it opens with a housing voucher, and if they're accepted, they may be low income, even though they weren't counted as such at the beginning of the project financing stage. I trust that that's probably true. I hope that the city will display some numbers on September 1st that make that case, but I will say that we've been asking for information all year on how this bond money will be allocated and who will live in these projects. And we haven't had word one for that. So if other people are getting have information, and they do, about the actual outcomes of affordable housing projects, I don't know why the city doesn't get it. I don't know why the city council doesn't discuss it. And September 1st is pretty much their last chance to do it, because people are going to start sending in their their mail-in ballots September 4th.
Right. Another person asked, if the city council doesn't adjust the framework of this bond and it fails, when can another bond be put to the voters?
Well, the simple answer there is the earliest would be the next election. So if there's a midterm election in 2021, there could be a bond then. Now, realistically, it probably would be in fall, the October election in 2021.
I would like to interject that, the city has funding available right now that where they could build low-income housing, or they could keep the low-income housing stock readily available. They have low-income housing stock available, but they tear it down instead of fixing it back up and putting people that need that space there. They're tearing it down. So we have the resources available now. They just choose to use it for so-called potential down south event issues, or things like stadiums and all that other fluff stuff that people don't actually need. But there's funding available. We don't have to wait on a bond for the city of Raleigh to build low-income housing and to help low-income people. They just don't put people first.
That's true.
Sorry,
So when
I'm
you-
going through the questions here, guys. I had a let's see here. What can we do to promote the views of these wonderful presenters? Why is the info about the bond not all over the newspaper news? If we vote no, what will be the next step to help affordable housing for poor people?
So the Housing Justice Coalition is not going to go out of existence after this vote, whether this bond issue passes or not. Wanda's exactly right. The city has lots of other money that it can make available for housing renovations, for neighborhood revitalization, if they choose to do it. And that's what the Housing Justice Coalition is all about: justice and equity in housing in Raleigh and Wake County. So we're going to stay on this thing, and we're trying to make our views heard. And whether the bond passes or not, we're going to keep at it.
That's
Okay,
right.
another question, you guys may understand this, I don't know that I do. Is inclusionary zoning something the city should be pressing the state to allow?
Since I have probably the longest history, having been on council for 14 years, and my message there is, I was on council when we had a solidly Democratic legislature, but the home builder and real estate development lobby did not want it, and they contributed broadly across the state to make sure they had strong support to keep the local governments from ever getting inclusionary zoning. Now, with the growing awareness of the housing crisis, and particularly with the awareness now of all the race disparities that have really made life unbearable, but now visible to affluent white people of other people living in the city of Raleigh, there may be more of an appetite, obviously on the West Coast and some other places, they're turning more to inclusionary zoning, but I haven't seen a strong appetite unless there's a sea change in the way people feel about how we should fund affordable housing. There's a strong development industry, and they'd much rather have the taxpayers fund it rather than them be part of the solution.
Okay, this is a question that came very early on. Actually, it came before we got started this evening, which is, how can the council be pressured to specify a % of funds to be allocated for 30% AMI and below?
Okay, I'll bite on that one. I mean, we live in a representative democracy, and again, I was on the other side of the table for many years, and it's all about numbers and a convincing argument, and so you have to show council that you have a compelling case, but you also have to show them that it's not just you with the compelling case. That you have an army with you that also agrees that this is an important thing for us to become the kind of city we want to be. And right now it's difficult because there's a lot of other painful things on people's mind with the coronavirus. But I think that's just the way a representative democracy works.
Okay. I'm being told it's time to wrap up the Q&A. We've gone long. We're 20 minutes after. Wanda, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, they ask, what can you do? I know there's the call to action, and I guess this is a good segue into it, but contact your city councilor. Especially here in Southeast Raleigh, Corey Branch definitely needs to know that it's a human right to have a house, to have a safe, sustainable, equitable place to live in Southeast Raleigh. And hotel spaces are not those spaces. So most definitely contact him and your at-large and the mayor, because they have a totally different view on how African Americans and low income and most vulnerable people should live. Because it seems they pass these hotels all the time, and it seems like it's okay for them. They're more concerned about building a stadium and what's downtown Raleigh, restaurants and stuff, instead of housing people, which is a human right. So let them know you're not going to vote for them if they vote against us.
Okay, and finally, and this is like, I guess we have the answer to the
time
question.
for me to put up the slide?
Well, wait, several people have asked, is this evening's webinar going to be posted and available anywhere for viewing?
Yes, I think Susan actually is going to wrap up and tell people that, but it is being recorded, and I think it'll be on our website at some point, or it'll be somewhere at some point.
Okay.
So is Susan with us to
Yes,
wrap us up?
I am. So why don't I just wrap up the event as quickly as we can. I want to say thank you to everyone who attended our first webinar and for your patience at the very beginning. We'll figure it out by the time we do one again, for sure. But here it is, 8:25, and we have over 100 attendees still attending this webinar. I think everyone is hungry for information, and I can assure you that we will be posting our recording on our YouTube channel. Give us a couple of days to get that posted, but that's something that you can definitely refer to. And we've had numerous requests for copies of the PowerPoints and slides that were shown and shared tonight. And we'll figure out a way to package that information so that we can make it available to you. And then as far as what we need to do next, I think you heard it loud and clear that as many times as we've tried to contact the City Council and make them aware of our position and our concern for the most needy, we have not received any reaction. However, we do know that they will be taking up the affordable housing bond in 1 week on the September 1st City Council meeting. And we have 1 week in which we can continue our pressure in the form of a call to action, which I would like, Russ, if you can put that slide up at any point, that would be great.
It's up.
It's up? I don't see it.
I don't see it either.
Okay, well, anyway, when you do, what I want to ask everybody to do is to write either by email or in letter form. I want you to write to the mayor, the city council, the city manager, and the city clerk. You can email it or you can send them a letter. A letter we're sure will get entered into the record. I want you to contact your circle of friends and neighbors and let them know what you've learned tonight about the affordable housing bond. The next thing I'd like you to do is to follow Livable Raleigh on social media and visit our website where you can see our blogs and our calendars and follow what's happening in the city. And our social media includes Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our website, we publish numerous blogs every week, and this should help keep you informed. If you want to join our mailing list, that's the surest way of staying in touch with everything we're doing. Just go to livableraleigh@gmail.com. On behalf of Livable Raleigh, I want to thank you for making time tonight to become an informed person about the Affordable Housing Bond. The 2020 Affordable Housing Bond webinar has been recorded, and as I said, it will be posted on Livable Raleigh's YouTube channel as soon as we receive a copy from Zoom and get it edited to be shown. Please take care of yourselves. Please stay healthy. Livable Raleigh believes that all residents of Raleigh should be able to live a full and dignified life of prosperity in a safe and innovative city. Thank you and good night.
Susan, can I say one thing?
Sure.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank Russ. And people who watch this webinar and think it went pretty well have no idea all the technical things that went wrong all day long, one after another. I mean, it was unbelievable. We practiced this webinar twice and it went fine. And then, but technology is a buggy thing. So y'all hung in there, did a great job. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you all well, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime after we recover. So thank you. Good evening.
All right, good night.
Good evening. Bye-bye.